Medieval England was a kingdom under siege, externally by France and Scotland and internally by its own ambitious barons. The loss of Normandy in 1204 haunted English kings, fueling a costly obsession to reclaim lost lands. France was the great rival, but the Scots fiercely resisted English control, forcing kings to fight on two fronts. At home, powerful barons, emboldened by Magna Carta, were as dangerous as any foreign enemy. Kings needed their support for war, but could never fully trust them. This constant tension often left England divided and vulnerable. From the boy King Henry III to the bloody Wars of the Roses, England was shaped by war, plague, and rebellion. The dream of conquering France brought both glory and ruin, stretching the kingdom to its limits. Yet, these struggles sparked profound change. The need for war funds forced kings to negotiate, giving rise to Parliament. War forged a new English identity, distinct from the French. Soldiers at Crécy and Agincourt fought not just for their king, but for England itself. The relentless pressures of this era transformed the kingdom, setting the stage for the nation to come. Out of conflict and ambition, a new England was forged. The medieval struggle was not just about failure, it was the crucible of a nation. Medieval England was a world of strict hierarchy. At the top stood the king, followed by powerful lords and their knights, all bound by feudal loyalty and military service. Castles dotted the landscape, symbols of noble power. Most people, however, were peasants, tied to the land, working for their lord in exchange for a small plot. Their lives were ruled by the seasons, the harvest, and the demands of their masters. The church was the other great power, shaping every aspect of life, from birth to death. Its wealth rivaled the crown, and its teachings justified the social order as God's will. The local priest was a figure of authority, and the promise of heaven or threat of hell kept people in line. But change was stirring. Towns and cities grew, creating a new class of merchants and craftsmen outside the old feudal system. These urban burgesses valued trade over land, seeking charters and self-government from the king. Their rising influence began to crack the rigid pyramid of medieval society. Commerce and ambition were reshaping England. The old order was no longer unchallenged. The seeds of transformation were sown in the growing towns. Medieval society was changing, slowly but inevitably. The future belonged to those who could adapt. Parliament began as a solution to the king's constant need for money. Medieval kings relied on income from their lands, but war demanded more. To raise taxes, they had to summon the kingdom's most powerful men to a great council. Under Henry III, these councils evolved. Simon de Montfort's 1265 assembly included not just barons and clergy, but also knights and burgesses. This was a turning point, the beginnings of representation. Edward I saw the value in this new arrangement. His model parliament of 1295 brought together nobles, clergy, knights, and townsmen. The principle was simple. If all must pay, all should consent. Over time, the commons realized their leverage. They could trade money for reforms. Petitions to the king became laws. The king's need for war funds gave the commons power. This partnership, born of necessity, laid the foundation for England's unique political system. Parliament was not yet supreme, but its roots were deepening. The balance of power was shifting. England's government was being transformed from within. Before turning to France, England had to secure its own borders. Edward IV conquered Wales with brutal efficiency, building mighty castles and imposing English rule. Wales was subdued, its resources now fueling English ambitions elsewhere. Scotland, however, proved a far tougher challenge. Edward invaded, but the Scots, led by William Wallace and Robert the Bruce, refused to yield. The English suffered a crushing defeat at Bannockburn in 1314. Scottish independence was secured, and the war dragged on, draining English resources. The conquest of Wales was decisive. Scotland remained unconquered. These border wars sapped England's strength and distracted from the dream of conquering France. The lesson was clear. Smaller nations could be subdued, but a united Scotland was a different prospect. The northern conflict was a constant drain. England's ambitions were always checked by the realities of its own island. The struggle for dominance at home shaped every move abroad. The road to France ran through Wales and Scotland, and it was never easy. The Hundred Years' War was a series of brutal clashes between England and France, sparked by rival claims to the French throne. English kings, from Edward III to Henry V, sought to reclaim lost lands and glory. Early victories at Crécy and Poitiers, powered by the deadly longbow, stunned Europe. English armies, though outnumbered, shattered French knights and won immense prestige. But France was too vast to conquer outright. The French adapted, avoiding open battle and wearing down the English. Gains were lost as quickly as they were won. The war reignited under Henry V, whose triumph at Agincourt seemed to bring final victory. The Treaty of Troyes named Henry heir to the French crown. But Henry's sudden death left an infant son to inherit a divided realm. The dream of uniting England and France slipped away. The war drained England's treasury and spirit. By the end, most French lands were lost. The Hundred Years' War brought fleeting glory, lasting hardship, and set the stage for turmoil at home. The cost was immense, the prize forever out of reach. England's ambitions in France would haunt it for generations. In 1348, the Black Death swept through England, killing up to half the population. Villages emptied, fields lay fallow, and the old order was shattered. With so many dead, surviving peasants found new power. Lords needed their labor and had to offer better terms. Wages rose, and many peasants demanded freedom from feudal obligations. The government tried to stop this with harsh laws, but the old system was breaking down. The plague shook faith and fueled both religious fervor and fatalism. The psychological shock was profound. The Black Death accelerated social change, weakening the grip of the landowning elite. Serfdom began to crumble. The economy and society became more fluid. The plague was a catalyst for transformation. The rigid bonds of feudalism loosened. Common people gained leverage they'd never had before. Out of devastation came opportunity. England would never be the same. The upheaval after the Black Death led to open revolt. In 1381, a hated poll tax sparked the Peasants' Revolt. Commoners, led by Wat Tyler and John Ball, demanded an end to serfdom and oppressive laws. Rebel armies marched on London, burning and looting, their anger fueled by new ideas of equality. The young King Richard II met the rebels, promising reforms. But after Wat Tyler's death, the promises were broken and the revolt crushed. Leaders were executed, and serfdom officially remained. Yet the ruling class was shaken. Never again would a poll tax be imposed. The revolt showed the power of united commoners. The old feudal certainties were gone. Power dynamics had shifted for good. The voices of the people could no longer be ignored. The Peasants' Revolt was a warning and a turning point. The seeds of future change had been sown. England's social order would never fully recover. The age of unquestioned hierarchy was ending. Defeat in France brought chaos at home. Disgruntled nobles and unemployed soldiers fueled a vicious power struggle, the Wars of the Roses. Weak King Henry VI was caught between rival factions, the Red Rose of Lancaster and the White Rose of York. Battles were short, savage, and personal, fought by private armies. The common people suffered in the crossfire. Allegiances shifted constantly. Betrayal was common. Richard, Duke of York, was killed, but his son Edward seized the throne as Edward IV. The conflict raged on, with the throne changing hands repeatedly. Edward's death left his sons vulnerable. His brother, Richard III, seized power. The young princes vanished in the Tower, and Richard's reign was troubled and short. The nobility was decimated, and the old order crumbled. The wars left England exhausted and ready for change. The Plantagenet dynasty was ending. A new contender was about to emerge. The stage was set for a new England. In 1485, Henry Tudor landed in Wales, rallying those weary of war. At Bosworth Field, Richard III was killed. Henry became King Henry VII. His marriage to Elizabeth of York united the warring houses, symbolized by the Tudor rose. Henry ended the chaos, curbed the power of the nobles, and built a strong, centralized government. The dream of conquering France was abandoned. England turned inward, rebuilding after decades of conflict. Parliament, born of royal need, became a permanent part of government. The Black Death and Peasants' Revolt had broken feudal bonds. The Wars of the Roses destroyed the old nobility. Out of failure and struggle, a new nation emerged. English identity was forged in adversity. The monarchy was transformed, stronger, more stable, and more modern. The medieval era ended and a new chapter began. England had failed to conquer France, but in the process, it had conquered itself. The foundations of modern England were laid in the fires of medieval conflict.